The silence hit Chris first. After 2 decades alone in the void, cruising between stars, chasing forgotten missions, surviving on nothing but routine and will, he found himself crashing onto an unfamiliar world. The roar of his damaged ship gave way to an eerie quiet, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow even his own breath. Vespera was unlike any planet he'd ever encountered. As the smoke from the wreck settled, Chris crawled from the twisted wreckage of his shuttle. The sky above was a strange, bruised purple, streaked with glowing clouds that pulsed softly like a living heartbeat. Towering trees with crimson leaves stretched endlessly, their branches creaking faintly in a breeze he couldn't yet feel. His limbs ached, broken ribs, a sprained ankle, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Alone for 20 years, surviving. On minimal supplies and the ghosts of memories, he had one clear objective: survive. The ground beneath his boots was soft, almost sponge-like, and scattered with strange, bioluminescent plants that emitted a faint blue glow, illuminating thus forest floor like stars trapped beneath a canopy. The air was thick, humid, tinged with scents both sweet and alien. Earthy moss mixed with something metallic, sharp, almost electric. Chris took a deep breath, savoring the alien atmosphere, but inside, a familiar unease began to coil. This place was alive, not just in the way any ecosystem thrived, but as if the planet itself watched him, whispering secrets through rustling leaves and distant calls he couldn't place. He moved cautiously, every muscle tense, senses sharpened. His military training resurfaced automatically, scanning for threats, memorizing landmarks, calculating risks. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth painted in vivid colors and soft shadows. Hours passed as he wandered, finding little sign of intelligent life, only strange tracks in the mud, the fleeting silhouette of creatures with elongated limbs darting between trees. He marked his path carefully, knowing the planet's wild heart would be unforgiving to the careless. That night, Chris built a crude shelter beneath the gnarled roots of a colossal tree, whose bark shimmered faintly in the dim light. The forest sounds grew louder, low growls, distant howls, and the incessant rustling of unseen movement. Sleep eluded him, haunted by memories of past solitude and the pressing weight of this new, unknown world. Yet, amid the alien wilderness, a flicker of something else ignited within him, a fragile spark of hope. After 20 years drifting through space, the chance to belong, to reconnect, was a whisper carried on the wind. As dawn broke, bathing the forest in golden purple light, Chris steeled himself. This world was a test, and he was ready to face whatever secrets it held. Unseen eyes watched from the shadows. The silent world of Vespera had welcomed its new visitor, but it would not reveal its true nature so easily. The morning light filtered through the crimson canopy like spilled wine, casting a surreal glow over the tangled forest floor. Chris stirred from his restless sleep beneath the colossal, shimmering tree. Every sound felt amplified in the alien. Quiet, the distant drip of sap, the soft hum of insects, the faint crackle of dry leaves beneath unseen footsteps. He rose carefully, muscles stiff but alert. The world around him was both breathtaking and hostile, a place where beauty and danger entwined in delicate balance. As he stepped forward, a soft voice echoed, like a murmur carried by the wind. Chris froze. The sound was human, yet it felt otherworldly, distant yet intimate. He strained his ears, scanning the surroundings. Through a gap in the trees, he saw movement, figures emerging from the shadows. 20 strong at first. Women? All. They moved with a quiet grace, eyes sharp and cautious. Their skin bore the hues of the earth, bronze, olive, sun-kissed gold, and their hair ranged from raven black to chestnut brown, tied with strips of cloth and adorned with feathers and beads. They carried simple weapons, spears tipped with stone, bows curved from ancient wood. Chris's heart pounded. He had not seen another person, let alone a group, since he left Earth. The years of solitude had etched deep lines on his face, but in their eyes he saw no fear, only wary curiosity. One woman stepped forward, taller than the rest, her gaze steady and commanding. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice clear, carrying the authority of a leader, yet tempered with genuine curiosity. Chris's throat was dry. He swallowed and replied, "I'm Chris. I come from far away. Spacefarer, lost traveler. I mean, no harm." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "This is Vespera, our home. You are not the first to arrive, but few are welcomed." She gestured to the others, silent watchers, their expressions unreadable. Chris glanced at their weapons, then at their faces. These were survivors hardened by the wild planet, but also protectors of something ancient and sacred. The woman introduced herself as Mira, the chieftain of the Whispering Tribe, named for their custom of speaking softly, lest the forest spirits hear. Chris listened as Mira spoke of their people, 200 women bound by tradition, guardians of Vespera's secrets. They had thrived in isolation, raising children and defending their land from the unseen dangers lurking beyond. There was a pause, thick with unspoken questions. "Why do you wander alone?" Mira asked, voice soft but piercing. Chris hesitated. The memories surfaced, the loss, the years adrift, the silence that had been his only companion. "I lost my world. I've been searching for purpose, for home." Mira regarded him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You may stay, but the forest watches, and trust is earned." In the days that followed, Chris learned the ways of the tribe, how they hunted, using the light of the glowing plants, how they listened to the wind for signs of change. He trained with their warriors, sharing skills honed over decades. They taught him their language, their stories, and the deep reverence they held for the planet. Amidst the alien wilderness, Chris felt the walls around his heart begin to crumble. The tribe, with their fierce loyalty and quiet strength, became more than strangers. They became a fragile new family. But the forest was restless. Unseen eyes followed Chris's every move, and whispers drifted on the breeze, warnings of a darkness creeping ever closer, threatening to engulf them all. As night fell again on Vespera, Chris stood beside Mira, atop a ridge overlooking the endless crimson woods, the stars above flickering like distant fires. The battle for survival and for belonging had only just begun. The crimson dawn barely pierced the thick canopy as Chris awoke to the low murmur of voices. He sat up slowly, muscles aching but spirit restless. Outside the shelter, the tribe was already stirring, preparing for the day with practiced efficiency. Yet, beneath the usual rhythm, an undercurrent of tension rippled through the air. Mira appeared at the entrance, her face grave but composed. "Come," she said quietly. "We must speak." Chris followed her through the winding paths of glowing ferns and towering trees, the ethereal light casting eerie shadows on their path. The tribe's warriors had gathered in the clearing, 24 women standing in a tight circle, eyes scanning the dense forest with sharp vigilance. "We have sensed it," Mira began, her voice low, carrying the weight of unsaid fears. "A presence moves through the woods, something unnatural, ancient. It watches us from the dark." Chris's brow furrowed. What kind of presence? A younger woman, fierce-eyed and agile, stepped forward. "The Shadowborn," she whispered. "Creatures said to be born from the darkness beneath the earth. They prey on the living, silent, and relentless." The stories Chris had heard from scattered colonies echoed in his mind, legends of dark forces lurking beyond the edge of known space, things better left forgotten. Yet here, on Vespera, those tales took on flesh and bone. Mira looked to Chris, her eyes piercing. "Your knowledge of the stars and battles may prove vital. The tribe cannot face this alone." Chris nodded, feeling the old soldier's resolve awaken within him. "Tell me everything." She gestured to a rough map, etched into the bark of an ancient tree, a network of tunnels and caves beneath the forest floor, marked with symbols of warning. "They emerge from here, the undervein, a labyrinth of dark passages where light dies. We've lost hunters before, dragged into that abyss." As they planned their next moves, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was unfolding, something entwined with the very fate of the tribe and this wild planet. Later that day, Chris ventured closer to the edge of the undervein, flanked by two of the tribe's sharpest scouts. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Shadows shifted unnaturally among the rocks as if alive. Suddenly, a low growl echoed, deep, guttural, vibrating through the cavern walls. The scouts tensed, weapons ready. Chris's pulse quickened. "Stay close," he warned. From the darkness, pairs of glowing red eyes blinked open, revealing hulking forms covered in sinewy black scales. The Shadowborn were real, and they were watching. The battle was swift and brutal, a clash of steel and primal fury beneath the earth. Chris fought side by side with the women, their fierce determination igniting his own. When silence fell, the survivors emerged, breath ragged but unbroken. Mira met them at the cavern's mouth, pride and worry warring in her gaze. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The darkness will not rest." That night, as the HFY tribe gathered around flickering fires, Chris sat beside Mira, the weight of new responsibility settling over him. In this alien world, among warriors and shadows, he was no longer alone. He was part of something greater, a fragile hope standing, defiant beneath the crimson canopy. Chris awoke to a soft humming. It wasn't mechanical, not the low metallic vibration of ship engines or the whir of air recyclers he'd grown up with. This sound was organic, fluid, rhythmic, carried by wind and woven through trees. A harmony of female voices, drifting like mist through morning light. He sat up, the woven mat beneath him creaking slightly, and rubbed the remnants of sleep from his eyes. Sunlight speared through the curved slats of the hut, dancing across the smooth floor. He'd slept without nightmares for the first time in years. Stepping outside, he found himself staring at a miracle. The village no longer felt like a dream or a hallucination from long-term isolation. It was alive. Women moved with practiced grace, weaving shimmering cloths from silk-like fibers that hung from glowing vine trees. Some were tending to iridescent plants with roots that pulsed faintly in the soil. Others danced slowly in circles, arms raised. Toward the sun, eyes closed as if in communion with something Chris could not yet see. But what drew his attention most was the garden. It stretched behind the village in tiers, built into the slope of a green hill that overlooked a mirror-like lake. Every flower bloomed in impossible color, petals the size of hands, glittering with dew that caught light and split it into rainbows. Trees with translucent trunks glowed faintly from within. There were no fences, no tools. It was as if the flora itself had chosen to grow there in harmony with its caretakers. Sera waited by the entrance of the garden, arms folded, the same expression she always wore, half inviting, half testing. "You didn't run away?" she said, eyebrow arched. "Didn't seem polite," Chris replied, then paused. "Is this all real?" "Everything here is alive," she said, "even what doesn't speak." She led him down winding paths made from crushed pearl stone. Along the way he saw plants respond to their steps, curling gently as if bowing. A single tree unfurled a broad leaf to shade them. Insects glittered like fragments of stars, flitting between blossoms. The air was thick with the perfume of alien life, but soothing, never overpowering. Chris knelt beside a plant that pulsed softly in shades of pink and orange. "It reacts to you," Sera said. "It's reading you." "Reading me?" "Your body, your fear, your desire, everything that makes you a man." Chris looked at her, unsure whether she was teasing or warning, but she simply smiled and continued walking. Deeper in the garden he saw a great stone platform, ancient and veined, with cracks. Around it were more of the women, sitting cross-legged, chanting in low unison. In the center was a strange object, a crystalline orb floating above a shallow basin of water. Sera approached it reverently. "We call this Lunethera," she said, "the heart of the garden. It listens." "To what?" "To us, to the planet, to the stars." Chris approached cautiously. The orb shifted in color, green, then gold, then deep violet, when he neared it. For a moment he saw his reflection, and it startled him. He didn't look like the man who'd landed here. The beard, the hollow eyes, the sunken cheeks of solitude, fading. There was something softer, less alone. "You're changing," Sera whispered. "No," he said quietly. "I think I'm remembering who I was." Suddenly a shiver rippled through the air. The women stopped chanting. The garden seemed to still. A soft breeze carried a whisper, not from the women, from the garden itself. A single word spoken in a voice not entirely human nor entirely plant. "Stay." Chris's heart pounded. Sera reached out, fingers brushing his arm. "It accepts you." He didn't know what it was. The garden, the orb, the women, the planet? But something had reached into him and hadn't found fear, only longing to be known, to be part of something. And Chris knew in that moment that the planet, this strange, beautiful world, was offering more than shelter. It was offering belonging. But with it, a choice, one that he would not be able to undo. The sun was beginning to dip beneath the horizon when Chris was summoned to the Circle of Veils, a sacred gathering place hidden deep within the heart of the village. The path there was lined with lanterns glowing softly with bioluminescent light, casting flickering shadows on the faces of the women who silently watched him pass. Sera walked beside him, her expression unreadable beneath the fading light. The others kept their distance, but their eyes followed Chris as if measuring the invisible weight he carried, the past 2 decades of loneliness and isolation, now slowly unraveling beneath the scrutiny of this foreign world. The circle itself was a natural amphitheater formed by a ring of towering obsidian stones, polished smooth by time and weather, each carved with ancient symbols that shimmered faintly in the twilight. At the center lay a shallow pool, its surface glassy and dark, mirroring the fiery sky above. Chris stepped forward, his pulse quickening. This was the Rite of the Veil, a ceremony whispered about but never fully explained to outsiders, a test, a passage, a transformation. What it truly meant, he could only guess. A low murmur began, rising and falling like the tide, the voices weaving a chant in a language both strange and haunting. The women formed a circle around the pool, hands raised, fingers entwined like branches in a sacred dance. Sera turned to Chris, her green eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Tonight you will see the true face of this world." "Am I ready?" Chris asked, swallowing hard. Only one way to find out. She reached for his hand and led him to the edge of the pool. The water was cool, unnaturally so, sending a shiver through his fingertips as he dipped them in. It wasn't just water. It was a living mirror, a gateway. As Chris gazed into the depths, the surface rippled, and suddenly the world shifted. He saw visions, flashes of stars born and dying, ancient battles fought in the void, the rise and fall of civilizations long forgotten, then faces filled with hope and despair, love and loss, and always the garden thriving against impossible odds. But most of all he saw himself, not as the man who had arrived broken and alone, but as a part of something vast and eternal. A voice, soft but clear, whispered from the depths, wrapping around his mind like a silken thread. "Choose." Chris's breath caught. The choice wasn't just about survival or acceptance. It was about becoming, about surrendering the past to embrace a destiny entwined with the planet itself. Sera's hand tightened in his. "You belong here," she said, "but you must decide if you are ready to become one with us." Chris closed his eyes and let the visions wash over him. The isolation, the silence, the endless void of space, all faded. When he opened them again, the water had stilled. The women lowered their hands, and the murmurs ceased. Chris looked at Sera, his resolve hardening. "I'm ready," he said. A wave of warmth surged through the circle, and the obsidian stones glowed brighter, as if acknowledging the promise made that night. The rite of the veil was not an end, but a beginning, and Chris had just stepped across the threshold. The morning sun filtered softly through the thick canopy of ancient trees, casting dappled light on the village as it stirred awake. Chris awoke on a woven mat outside Sera's dwelling, the air humming with the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of loneliness begin to lift, not entirely gone, but less suffocating. Sera was already up, moving with a quiet grace, as she prepared herbs and berries in a small wooden bowl. She glanced at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "Rested well?" she asked, voice gentle but steady. Chris nodded, trying to shake the unfamiliar flutter in his chest. "I think I'm starting to understand what this place means to you." She handed him a small bundle wrapped in leaves. "Food for the journey ahead. Today, you learn the ways of the village, and we learn what kind of man you are." The others gathered slowly around them, women of all ages, their eyes curious but cautious. Among them was Malia, the village elder, whose presence commanded both respect and warmth. Her silver hair framed a face lined with wisdom and unspoken battles. "We must know you, Chris," Malia said, her voice like weathered stone. "To trust you is to open ourselves to a stranger, but this is the only way." Chris felt the weight of those words settle deep inside him. Trust was a fragile thing, and here, on this distant planet, it was the bridge between survival and exile. The day unfolded as a series of lessons and tests. Chris learned to gather the plants that healed, to move silently through the forest, to respect the rhythms of this ancient world. The women watched him closely, not as a visitor, but as a potential part of their story. Sera remained by his side, her presence a steady anchor. Yet even she was not immune to the questions that flickered behind her eyes, questions of loyalty, of fear, of the unknown. That evening, by the fire's glow, Chris found himself sharing stories of Earth, of battles fought and lost, of the loneliness that had defined his years in space. The women listened, their faces softening, their barriers lowering. "You carry many scars," Malia observed, "but here you might find a way to heal." It was not just words, it was a promise, fragile yet powerful. As the stars began to sparkle overhead, Chris realized that the threads of trust were weaving slowly between him and these women. He was no longer an outsider, but a visitor invited into the fold, a man on the cusp of becoming something new. But even as the night deepened, a shadow lingered, whispers of danger beyond the forest, of others who would challenge the fragile peace they had begun to build. For Chris, the path ahead was uncertain, but one truth was clear. Trust was the first step toward belonging, and belonging was the first step toward survival. The tranquility of the village was a fragile veneer, as Chris soon discovered. Whispers reached him in the night, carried on the cool wind that rustled the ancient leaves, a warning or perhaps a premonition. Danger lurked beyond the borders of their sanctuary, a reminder that peace was never guaranteed. At dawn, Malia gathered the women in the central clearing, her voice grave yet resolute. "Our watchers have seen movement in the outer forests. Strangers. We do not know their intentions, but we cannot ignore them. Chris stood among them, his senses sharpened by years of survival. "What kind of strangers?" he asked, his tone steady. "Bandits from the northern wastelands," Malia replied. "They are ruthless and desperate, preying on weaker settlements. If they come here, our way of life will be destroyed." Sera's eyes flickered with concern as she stepped closer to Chris, their silent bond stronger than ever. "We must prepare," she said softly, "but not just for battle, for unity." The village transformed swiftly. Spears were sharpened, traps set among the trees, and every woman, regardless of age, took up arms. Chris moved among them, teaching them tactics from his own experience, blending his warrior skills with their ancestral knowledge. That night, as shadows deepened around the campfires, Chris found a moment with Sera beneath the sprawling boughs. "We've come so far," he whispered. "I won't let them tear this apart." Sera reached out, her hand steady on his arm. "Nor will I, but the fight ahead will test more than just our strength. It will test the trust we've built and the hearts that beat for this place." As the moon rose high, its pale light cast long, haunting shadows. Suddenly, a crackle of leaves, distant but unmistakable. Chris froze, every muscle taut. The bandits had arrived. From the darkness, rough voices echoed, mingled with the clatter of weapons. The air grew thick with tension as the village braced itself for the first clash. Chris took a deep breath, his mind sharpening to a razor's edge. This was more than a battle for survival. It was a fight for a future that once seemed impossible, for belonging, for love, for a home born from trust and courage. The night erupted in chaos, the clash of steel, the cries of defiance, and the roaring spirit of a people united. Amid the turmoil, Chris caught sight of Sera, her blue eyes blazing with fierce determination, leading the women with unyielding resolve. In that moment he understood. They were not just fighting for their lives, but for a legacy that would outlast the stars. The dawn broke unevenly over the battered village. Smoke curled like ghostly fingers against the pale sky, remnants of the night's fierce battle. The scent of ash mixed with the damp earth, clinging to the clothes and skin of every survivor. Silence hung heavy, not the peaceful kind, but the uneasy pause after a storm. Chris moved through the village, his gaze sharp, his heart pounding with the weight of what had transpired. Faces he had come to know, fierce, determined women, were streaked with grime and blood, yet their eyes held something fiercer than fear, resilience. Sera stood atop a large stone, rallying the survivors. Her voice, though hoarse, carried a commanding strength. "They came to break us, but instead they forged us stronger. This land is ours, our home, and we will protect it with every breath." Cheers erupted fierce and raw. Chris caught her gaze, and in it he saw the spark that had drawn him to this place, a fierce love for a future they could build together. But the threat was far from over. Scouts returned with grim news. The bandits' numbers were not as small as they'd hoped. Reinforcements were gathering beyond the forest, poised to crush any who dared defy them. "We need allies," Chris said quietly to Sera as the crowd dispersed. "Strength in numbers." Sera nodded, her lips pressed thin with determination. "There are other clans nearby. Some might be persuaded to join us if we prove ourselves worthy." Together they planned. Their strategy was unconventional, not brute force alone, but unity, trust, and cunning. Chris led a small, skilled group to parley with neighboring clans. The journey was perilous. The borderlands were fraught with dangers both natural and human. Yet at each campfire meeting, his stories of the women's bravery, the unity of their tribe, and their refusal to be broken sparked hope. Meanwhile, back in the village, Sera marshaled the women to rebuild defenses, train in new combat techniques, and prepare for the coming war. She taught them how to wield not just weapons, but their own resolve as a shield. One evening, as Chris returned from a successful alliance meeting, the village gathered to welcome him. The air was charged with renewed hope. a fragile but powerful thing. Under the glow of torchlight, Chris stood beside Sera, feeling the weight of leadership settle upon them both. They were more than survivors now. They were the heart of a rebellion not only for survival, but for sovereignty. That night, beneath the stars, their hands found each other's, a silent vow passing between them. Together, they would ignite a flame that would burn through oppression, a fire born from courage, love, and the unbreakable spirit of those who dared to fight for a home. The cold bite of early morning crept through the trees as Chris stood watch on the ridge overlooking the valley. Below, the village stirred to life, women preparing weapons, children darting between huts, and the faint glow of fires flickering in the soft dawn light. But the serenity was a fragile veil over the storm that gathered beyond the horizon. Chris's eyes narrowed against the chill as a distant rumble echoed through the air, not thunder, but the steady cadence of marching feet and heavy armor. Word had come that the bandits were amassing a larger force than anyone had anticipated, bolstered by mercenaries drawn from the fringes of neighboring systems, hungry for profit and blood. He clenched his fists, recalling the sharp sting of yesterday's battle and the cost paid in sweat and sacrifice. Yet beneath the weight of the looming threat, there was a flicker of hope. Their alliances were growing, and with every new voice added to their cause, the fragile fabric of their rebellion grew stronger. Suddenly, a sharp cry shattered the dawn. Chris whirled to see Sera running up the slope, her red hair wild and eyes blazing with urgency. "They're moving faster than we thought," she gasped, nearly out of breath. "Scouts report their vanguard is only hours away." Chris's heart hammered in his chest. "We must ready the defenses. Every able woman must stand. No one leaves this village unprepared." Sera nodded grimly. "The time for hiding is over. We fight or we lose everything." Back in the village, the atmosphere transformed from tense anticipation to fierce determination. The women armed themselves with crude yet deadly weapons, sharpened blades, reinforced spears, and bows fashioned from the resilient wood of their homeland. The air buzzed with whispered prayers and battle cries. Chris moved among them, his presence steady and commanding. "Remember, this fight is not just for survival. It's for freedom, for the future we'll build together." As the sun climbed higher, the horizon darkened with dust clouds raised by the advancing army. The bandits, ruthless and merciless, were ready to crush the defiant tribe and seize their lands. The ground trembled beneath the thunderous charge as the first clash erupted at the village's edge. Metal rang against metal, and the cries of battle filled the air, raw, desperate, and filled with fierce resolve. Chris fought with a warrior's precision, his blade carving a path through the chaos. Beside him, Sera's voice rose above the din, rallying their fighters with fearless ferocity. Her eyes met his in a brief, blazing moment of shared strength. Hours blurred into an endless storm of violence. Each wave of attackers met with unyielding resistance. The women fought not just with weapons, but with a primal fire born from years of struggle and unbreakable hope. When the dust finally settled, the village lay scarred but unbroken. The invaders retreated, wounded and beaten, their numbers shattered by the fierce defense. As twilight bathed the battlefield in a haunting glow, Chris and Sera stood together amid the ruins, exhausted but victorious. "This is only the beginning," Chris said quietly, his voice heavy with both sorrow and resolve. Sera's hand found his, their fingers intertwining like a lifeline. "Then we prepare. For every shadow that falls, we will be the light that burns through it." And under the vast, star-studded sky, the promise of their fight echoed, an unyielding anthem of courage, love, and the unbreakable will to claim their destiny. The air was thick with tension, electric and suffocating as the storm approached, not the tempest of rain or wind, but the storm of war looming ever closer. Chris stood at the edge of the village, the weight of leadership settling heavily. on his shoulders. The faces around him were etched with fatigue and resolve, but hope still burned fiercely in their eyes. Behind him, the women of the tribe moved with purpose, reinforcing barricades, sharpening blades, and whispering prayers to the ancient spirits they believed watched over them. Among them, Sera's presence was a steady beacon, her fiery hair catching the dying light of the sun like a flame that refused to be snuffed out. Chris turned to her, their eyes locking in silent understanding. "We fight for every soul here, no matter what comes. This is our home." Sera nodded, her jaw set with iron determination. "And we fight for each other, together." The enemy's forces, battered but relentless, had not given up. Intelligence reports warned of a renewed assault, a final push to break the spirit of the tribe once and for all. The bandits' mercenaries had regrouped, now armed with heavier weaponry and brutal siege tactics. The village's survival depended on strategy as much as courage. In the war tent, Chris unfurled a crude map, tracing out the landscape's natural defenses and weaknesses. "We use the terrain," he explained, voice low but firm. "The ravine here can funnel their troops. We'll position our archers along the cliffs. The narrow passes will slow them." Sera studied the map, her fingers tapping thoughtfully. "I'll organize the women into squads for guerrilla tactics. Hit and run, sabotage. They'll never see us coming." Outside, the village's drumbeat began, a rhythmic call to arms that echoed like a heartbeat through the valley. It was a summons to stand tall against the darkness. As night fell, the first shadows of the enemy crept closer like a silent tide. Chris and Sera led their people into the wilderness, ready to strike before the bandits could reach their walls. The forest was alive with whispers and rustling leaves as ambush squads melted into the shadows, their movements fluid and deadly. Every arrow loosed, every blade swung was a declaration. This land would not be taken without a fight. Hours stretched into a relentless nightmare of blood and steel. Chris moved with a warrior's grace, his senses honed by years of hardship. Beside him, Sera was a whirlwind of fire, her voice a rallying cry, her strikes swift and precise. But even as they pushed the enemy back, a chilling realization settled in. The battle was no longer just for survival. It was a test of their souls. Amid the chaos, Chris caught sight of a figure moving unnaturally fast, a mercenary commander, wielding a gleaming, strange weapon that pulsed with energy. Their eyes met briefly, a silent challenge passing between them. Chris steeled himself. This ends tonight. The final confrontation would not just decide the fate of the village, but of every dream they had dared to build. As dawn broke over the scorched battlefield, the storm's fury began to wane, but the fire in Chris and Sera's hearts blazed brighter than ever, a promise that, even in the darkest hour, love and courage could forge a new dawn. The first light of dawn spilled over the scarred landscape like a hesitant promise. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood, yet a strange calm settled over the battlefield. The night's fury had ceased, leaving behind the echoes of battle. Broken weapons, fallen comrades, and whispered prayers carried on the cold morning breeze. Chris stood atop a jagged ridge, overlooking the remnants of the fight. His body ached, every muscle screaming from exhaustion and wounds, but his mind was sharper than ever. Around him the survivors gathered, ragged but unbroken, their faces etched with pain and determination. Sera moved beside him, her usual fire dimmed by the weight of loss. Her hands trembled as she tended to the wounded, her blue eyes reflecting the dawn's pale light like shards of ice. Despite the despair, there was a fierce resilience in her, a refusal to surrender to darkness. "We held them off," Chris said quietly, voice raw but steady. "But this isn't over, not by far." Sera nodded, wiping a smear of blood from a soldier's cheek. "They'll regroup. We need to prepare, not just for defense, but to reclaim what was taken. Their village once vibrant and full of life, now lay partially in ruins. The bandits' scorched earth tactics had left deep scars, and fear had seeped into the hearts of even the bravest. Yet amidst the rubble, a spark of hope remained, the unyielding spirit of those who refused to be crushed. Back at the command tent, Chris gathered his closest allies. Maps and reports littered the table, detailing enemy movements and supply lines. The mercenary commander from last night, known only as Varek, was more than a mere brute. He was a tactician, ruthless and cunning. "We need to strike at their heart," Chris declared. "Cut off their reinforcements, disrupt their command. If we don't, they'll return stronger." Murmurs of agreement filled the room. Among the council was Lena, the tribe's skilled scout whose knowledge of the surrounding wilderness was unparalleled. "I can infiltrate their camps," Lena offered, her voice steady. "Gather intel, sabotage their supplies." Sera stepped forward, her gaze fierce. "And I will lead a strike team. We take the fight to them before they can regroup." Chris met her eyes, pride and concern swirling in his chest. "We fight together. No one faces this alone." The plan was risky. A series of coordinated assaults deep into enemy territory, relying on stealth and speed rather than brute force. It was a gamble, but one they had no choice but to take. As preparations began, Chris found a moment alone by the village's shattered gate. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like reminders of all that was lost. Yet within him burned a resolve forged by every hardship and every victory. He thought of the women and men who had stood beside him, not just as warriors, but as family, of Sera's unwavering strength and the fragile beauty of hope amid ruin. A distant howl echoed through the valley, a call to arms, a summons for courage. Chris clenched his fists. The battle for their future was far from over. But no matter how shattered the dawn, they would rise, together. The night was heavy with silence, an uneasy calm that blanketed the land like a breath held in suspense. Stars scattered across the velvet sky, indifferent witnesses to the turmoil below. In the heart of the encampment, Chris stood by the dying. Embers of a fire, his silhouette sharp against the flickering glow. Every scar on his body, every ache in his limbs, told the story of battles fought and sacrifices made. Beside him, Sera moved with quiet grace, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if trying to read the future etched in the faintest glimmers of light. The village had been rebuilt, slowly and painstakingly, brick by brick, but the memories of war lingered in the air, a reminder of what they had endured to survive. "Tomorrow," Sera said softly, "we reclaim more than just land. We reclaim our freedom, our right to shape this world." Chris nodded, the weight of command pressing upon him, yet tempered by hope. The alliance they had forged, a fragile tapestry of trust between warriors, villagers, and scattered tribes, had grown stronger through fire and blood. The enemy's grip had been shattered, their forces scattered like dust in the wind. Varek, the ruthless commander who had threatened their existence, was defeated. His once mighty army lay broken, leaderless, unable to muster resistance. But Chris knew the victory was not merely in battlefields won. It was in the spirit rekindled. Among the people, inside the tent, council members gathered for one last time. Plans were laid for rebuilding not just walls and homes, but bonds, alliances with neighboring clans, systems to ensure peace and prosperity. Lena, ever vigilant, spoke of scouts to monitor distant threats. Sera proposed training centers to prepare future defenders. Others offered ideas for trade, agriculture, and governance. Yet, amid the plans, Chris's gaze found Sera's, a silent exchange carrying the weight of all they had faced. Their journey had been more than survival. It had been a transformation. As dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, Chris stepped outside. The village was alive with movement, children laughing, elders sharing stories, warriors tending their weapons. The air hummed with promise. He walked toward the horizon, where fields stretched wide and the distant mountains stood as guardians of their land. This was their new beginning, forged through struggle, sealed with unity. A hand slipped into his, warm and steady. Turning, he saw Sera, smiling, fierce, radiant, a queen not only of battle, but of hope. Together they faced the rising sun. The past was a shadow behind them, but the future gleamed bright, waiting to be written by their hands, Chris whispered. This is our world now, our home. Sera's voice was firm, filled with conviction, and we will protect it, no matter the cost. As light flooded the land, the people stood united, not as survivors of a shattered dawn, but as architects of a new era. Their story was far from over. It had only just begun.